good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are joining us. Thank you for your time today. My name's Anthony, and along with my colleague Richard, we're going to be your hosts in this first session of our two-part series, talking all things marketeers with marketing leaders. And the objective today is to start our first session where we're going to be talking about and sharing marketers, leaders, and their perspectives on the persistent challenges that slow teams down, especially around planning and budgeting and execution within the marketing department. So joining me in doing so is Dave Jones, who is the founder of Instinctive Solutions, and Nick Milne, who is the CEO and Chief Effectiveness Officer and co-founder of Go Ignite and the Ignition Room. Dave has a lot of experience of running and managing large marketing departments and teams within large corporate organizations, and likewise Nick has multiple years of experience working with, for, and alongside a wide range of marketing departments. So between the pair of them, lots of different perspectives and understandings as to how marketing teams are run, the challenges that they face, and how they typically overcome those and what the solutions might be. And that's what we're going to touch on predominantly in this first session. A couple of housekeeping things from me. You're more than welcome to share any questions you may have during this process. We only have 30 minutes, so we would kindly ask that you do so via the chat. And if we don't manage to get an answer to you during the 30 minutes, we will endeavour to come back to you as soon as we possibly can at the end of the webinar directly. And there will also be details at the end of this webinar with regards to the second session that we're hosting in a few weeks' time, that we'll speak about both at the end of this webinar, but also follow up with you directly regarding the details of that. So without further ado, I will hand over initially to my colleague Richard, who's going to kick the procedure off. And then between Richard and I, we'll engage with our two esteemed guests and hopefully give you some interesting insights for the next 30 minutes or so. Over to you, Richard.
Good stuff. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. I thought a good place to start might be just around kind of the definition, if you like, of what we mean by marketing effectiveness. So I'm going to point this one initially to Nick. We hear a lot about different marketing roles and marketing effectiveness, marketing excellence, and sort of various different connotations. But in your experience, what do you mean by marketing effectiveness? All marketers want to be effective, don't they?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? No, I think it's a really interesting question because the definition to me is simple, but it sometimes gets quite confused in organization. So effectiveness is the value created from marketing activity. And I don't think it gets any more complicated than that. But where it kind of loses sight is effectiveness within an organization is normally the measurement team, the team that produces the analytics, the marketing, the marketing modeling that shows the attribution of marketing. And so you get this kind of disconnect between the value being created versus the analytics to actually help understand the value that it is generating. And I think it then gets confused because you get a gap between marketing planning and marketing measurement and effectiveness, which then means that there's only one person or one team responsible for effectiveness in an organization versus the whole marketing department being accountable for the value that they generate. So I think it's simple. I think it's about effectiveness being the value that marketing activities generate, but that definition gets lost in translation through marketing departments.
Sorry, I put myself on mute there. Dave, have you, in your capacity and your experience as a CMO leading, kind of marketing teams, how did you focus on effectiveness and kind of what are some of the measurements and perhaps KPIs and things that you would be setting in order to know whether you're being effective or not?
Well, I think the interesting thing, just picking up on what Nick said, can't disagree with anything he said with regards to it's the value that marketing produces. I think the devil's in the detail with so many things in marketing, right? Define value is the challenge for me, because it depends which lens you look through to define that value. If you're looking from the sales team's lens, then it's potentially the number and the quality of leads that are coming through. If you're looking at things from a branding perspective, it might be metrics like share of voice and how you're perceived in the wider marketplace. So I think, like I say, as with everything, the devil is in the detail, and the key is really working with the wider business and not getting siloed, not getting, caught in a single myopic perspective. So as Nick said, you can't just measure, web statistics. You can't just measure the leads that are coming through. You have to look at it from the various different lenses, bring those together, and start defining a collective understanding of what you want marketing to do. And once you've defined what you want to do, then you can start measuring how effective you are at that. And then you can start looking at how to become more effective in all of those different pieces.
Interesting. And so that makes me think of another question then. So as a CMO or as a marketing leader, you're working with leadership in terms of identifying what the core business objectives and goals are. So what are some of the early warning signs, if you like, that perhaps marketing is veering away from those core business objectives? And I'm going to bring Nick in here as well, because one thing that I've heard Nick talk a lot about is kind of trying to identify or help businesses not get very efficient at the wrong things. And I guess, we're, as marketers, you're all focused on lead gen and hitting, certain kind of goals and KPIs that are, kind of in immediate focus. But how do you stay true to the actual core business objectives?
Well, I think that there's a slightly different take on that, if I can throw that in, because a lot of people look at marketing as an outbound function. And marketing, if it's done properly, provides a feedback loop to the business as well. So far too many organizations define their business objectives, pass them down to sales, pass them down to marketing, and marketing just does them. And those organizations tend to get stuck in that metric, that reporting loop, and that they do things for the sake of doing things. If marketing is working properly, it's providing a feedback loop, especially product marketing, right? It's going out there, it's talking to prospects, it's talking to customers, it's feeding back to the business with regards to which products, services, solutions are actually relevant, are working, and how to change those business objectives in the first place. So marketing has to have a seat at that executive table to define those business objectives from a realistic point of view. If you start things properly and define those objectives with the perspective, or from the perspective of sales, marketing, operations, service, solutions, product, and get that done properly in the first place, then you stand less of a chance of actually just drifting off down those blind alleys where you're just doing things for the sake of doing things.
Interesting. Nick, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think it's really clear that translation of kind of business objective into customer or consumer, what's the outcome you're trying to drive? I mean, some organizations call it jobs to be done. So if you're trying to drive a 1% increase in sales, a 10% increase, well, what does that mean in terms of the real number of consumers that you need to convert? And I think once you get that translation, it's very easy to link things back up to the activity that you're trying to drive, rather than get lost in the smartness of, some really articulate, clever marketing measurement, for example. But if it doesn't speak the language of the business objective, then you're going to lose the confidence and credibility with board colleagues, with sales teams, with product teams, etc. So yeah, having that really clear, clearly articulated kind of link between business and marketing objectives critical.
So if I may jump in at this point, Dave and Nick, you've both mentioned multiple different teams, multiple different individuals and departments with all of that. From our experience, fragmentation is a topic that often props its ugly head during these conversations. Can you talk to us a little bit about what fragmentation means in this context, the consequences of it, and any experiences you have from your perspectives as to how that's typically solved and how it typically manifests itself.
Yeah, shall
Either one
I,
of you
shall I
start.
start? Yeah, shall I start on that one?
Either one.
I think kind of fragmentation takes many different forms. I think there's kind of classic fragmentation within marketing of kind of the brand versus performance team. So those that generate long-term value and those that generate short-term value. And I think what that then kind of tends to play out is you've got different teams competing for similar budgets, which kind of can create misalignment across the organization around whose responsibility it is to drive what outcome. So I think you've got a within marketing challenge, but then you've got classic kind of fragmentation between things like sales and marketing teams who should have complete alignment through the purchase funnel around who's doing what activity. And without that kind of alignment, you then start to get into kind of question of what is the quality of a marketing lead and does that translate down into sales activity? So all of this fragmentation, whether it's teams, whether it's channels, means that there's no, or it's harder to kind of integrate and align around the activity that you're doing and the value that it should be generating.
And Dave, any thoughts from your perspective?
Sure, just to jump in there, I think you're absolutely right, Nick. That inter-marketing department fragmentation happens a lot, especially when you start talking about effectiveness, right? If you think about marketeers, there tend to be two types of marketeers. You get the creative marketeers, who tend not to like process, and they're very creative and fluid by definition. And then you get the operational marketeers who like process, who like numbers, who like knowing what's happening and how it's happening. Those two tend to rub up against each other. Let's put it politely. So getting that right within a marketing department is a key challenge, and figuring out how to incentivize those different teams and how to find the common ground between those two teams to work towards a common goal. And that common ground theme then needs to run between and beyond the departments, right? There's so much ego involved in sales and marketing departments, let's be honest. Getting rid of those egos, finding leaders of the sales team, of the marketing team, of the operations product team, whatever, who can actually communicate, work together at a strategic level, and then feed that back down through and into their individual teams. That's the key for me. And we'll talk a lot today about communication. We'll talk about clarity. We'll talk about coordination. All of these things, they're not purely marketing functions and facets. They're strategic leadership, business management aspects, but they're so critical because a lot of us find ourselves in marketing departments within businesses that don't have that strategic and that corporate oversight. And it just makes it hard. And we end up chasing our tails all the time and firefighting, as opposed to doing things in the way that we would like to do things.
Yeah.
Just a message for our audience. We'd be keen to get any of your thoughts, any of your anecdotes on any of the topics we've covered so far. Again, as a gentle reminder that the purpose of this initial conversation is just simply to touch on some of the things that we feel we see through our experiences are typical issues, challenges, problems, whatever the right terminology is within the marketing world. Keen to understand if you agree with any of this, if there are any other thoughts, any other things that you would like us to touch on or consider that may not be discussed at this point, so that we can better articulate and better demonstrate how we might be able to help with those things in our second series. Richard, as part of moving on from that, we want to talk about the short-term bias in planning cycles and how they're driven by quarterly targets. Have you got any questions for our esteemed colleagues on that topic?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. First off, I want to take Dave up on the fact. Surely you don't mean people in sales have got egos, Dave? Come on.
I said people in sales and marketing have egos. Let's play the balance card again.
Who knew? Yeah. So getting on to some practical examples and anecdotes in your experiences then. So what strategies have you found to prove really effective in kind of integrating annual goals with the fast changing quarterly plans, for example, so that every short-term campaign serves a larger strategic direction?
So I think that this is a great question, and a lot of this comes down to foresight and planning, right? Because the reality for every marketing leader is that if you get into a bun fight with a sales leader, sales will win. That's just the reality, because sales is the revenue generation engine, and it will always come first. But as a marketing leader, you should know that. So everything that you do should be in preparation of the fact that at some point you're going to get thrown a curveball. You're going to be asked to run a campaign from a short-term perspective that, if you haven't prepared for it, could just completely derail all of your plans and all of your strategic goals for the year. But you know that's coming. So just deal with it. And, I've got numerous kids. Antony knows this. I don't ask my kids what they want to do. I give them 2 or 3 options that I've already chosen. And then whatever they choose, they think they're in control, but whatever they choose, I've already sort of defined that direction already. So I think, knowing what that's going to look like, the detail of a campaign is a lot of the time just the minutiae. Knowing what type of campaign you're going to run, knowing how you want to run that, and being prepared for that mitigates against the fact that you are going to get thrown those curveballs every so often.
Interesting. Nick, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, plenty of thoughts. I always plenty of thoughts. I think one of the biggest challenges we see is visibility of marketing plans, and sometimes that goes a long way to offset the short-term demand, because this is all about confidence that you're doing the right things and it's going to generate value at the right time. Businesses are cyclical, they are seasonal, so activities and plans need to fit the cycle of that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that value is generated from activity within the quarter that you're running that activity. It might be 6 months, it might be 12 months time, but creating that kind of story and visibility of when that value should be generated can sometimes, not always, nor should it always, mitigate that short-term demand. So I think having kind of really clear visibility of all your plans in one place, being clear around what that activity is and what the outcome is you're trying to drive from them, enables marketing to have a better conversation with sales to say, well, do we actually need to do this? Because actually, give us 2 months, 3 months, or 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We're having this activity coming up, which is already planned, and it's going to drive X, Y, and Z. And for us, it's all about then creating a richer conversation where there is balance around the intelligence needed to create the value that the business is asking for.
Interesting. And can you, I'll put this out to both of you, can you give us some kind of real life examples of where, implementing better planning, implementing, better tools and processes focused on what you're talking about has had a demonstrable, kind of impact on the business?
Yeah, so I can talk about an example of a client where we were working with, where we were asked to kind of come in and help bridge the gap between kind of brand and the P&L within the business. And there's a huge kind of disconnect with the brand team kind of creating top-down value generation through the funnel, and the P&L not seeing the value that the brand team were creating. And they started to kind of meet in the middle, driving more kind of consideration, brand consideration, consumer consideration type activity. And what kind of played out essentially was that both teams created their own TV ad, which were airing at the same time. And the CEO was like, well, what's going on? He made the call around which TV ad was better based around kind of what he thought rather than evidence. So for us, it was a really kind of clear example of the different types of planning and demand for value generation playing out across 2 disparate teams who found it hard to communicate with each other. There was friction, there was politics, there was ego, there's everything that we've already touched on. But having that visibility of what was driving what activity would have gone some way to stopping that from happening.
Yeah, interesting. Dave?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, mate. Go ahead, Dave.
So I want to pick up on the classic sales versus marketing rub, where they intersect, right? It's where marketing qualified leads get past the sales and they turn into sales qualified leads. This happens in every single organization. And I think we've talked a lot about creating shared goals and working together. If you think about the KPIs that typically get associated with that, marketing's charged with generating as many MQLs as they can do. Sales is charged with generating as many sales qualified leads as they can do. What happens is that marketing generates a load, they hand them over to sales. If those leads don't convert from marketing qualified to sales qualified, sales starts calling out marketing, you're giving us rubbish leads. Marketing, you know the argument. One simple, really effective way to convert that into a shared goal is to get both departments working towards a conversion metric. So the KPI being how many MQLs convert to SQLs. It's pretty instantaneous. All of a sudden the sales guys go, well, what was wrong with that lead was that they didn't have this and they didn't have this, which gives marketing instant feedback to refine their process, to do a little bit more work on qualification. Building out those shared KPIs makes a massive difference to get those two teams working together and figuring out how to drive effectiveness and value in really, really small chunks, but they all build up.
And sorry, Ant, I know you've got a question, but go ahead. Sorry.
So factoring all of that in, Dave, we're thinking what you're typically talking about there is ineffective prioritization, right? Too many initiatives, not enough focus on both sides of the fence. So being able to bring in some short-term selection process in terms of what it is that the sales teams need versus the KPIs that the marketing team have been set, bringing those two things back together and creating that focus on the initiatives is obviously going to be much more effective than having lots of things with not much focus on any of them, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, look, the one thing about marketing is that it's not a single entity. You're not doing one thing at any one time. You're running multiple campaigns, processes, activities. And for me, I like to break things down into some simple ratios, right? So for me, 60% of my activity needs to be my core activity. 30% of my activity can be things that just come out the woodwork. They're things that, can be slightly deviated. So all of these campaigns and short-term quarterly activities that I know I'm going to get, I factor that into my planning. It's not going to detract me from the 60% core business that I'm running. And then I use 10% for what I call my moonshot. So that's stuff that I can just experiment with and play with that might come off, but might not. But that's a really easy way to figure out, where your priorities are. If something falls in that core activity, that's going to take a higher priority in the long term than the quarterly activities. But in the short term, those quarterly activities obviously are going to start bubbling up in terms of prioritization. But yes, getting a clear view of what those priorities are and sharing that across the teams is critical.
Okay, so look, gents, we're running out of time. We've only got a few minutes left. Nick, Dave, can you, in a couple of sentences each, just give us a quick example of siloed processes that don't connect sales and finance and marketing, and then finally finish on a bit of a summarization of the consequences of a lack of evidence when determining the correct budget allocation, things like that. Can you both just give us a sentence or two on both of those things? Because that leads nicely into the introduction as to what we'll be doing next.
Oh, that's a nice big question.
There you go. Answer that in 30 seconds.
So I think I'm going to start where I shouldn't start, which is the measurement side bit. And if the measurement is broken, then it just kind of creates confusion. And if measurement doesn't feed articulating clearly into planning, then it kind of creates chaos. I think the big thing for us is that if you are trying to prove the value of marketing, it's got to fit the cycle of how the business defines value. Because if you're coming back too late to tell people that your activity has generated X pounds, X amount of pounds, X amount of leads, but that time has gone and your sales teams, your P&Ls have already accounted for that activity against that, it's not going to work well together. So I would kind of focus on making sure that that effectiveness cycle fits the planning cycle of the business. So the conversations, they're almost kind of oscillating at the same time together.
I love
Thanks,
that
Nick.
concept. Building on that, yeah, I'm thinking about the typical way that budgets work, right? So you'll sit there and the business will say, hey, we need to do 100% growth next year. That gets passed down to the sales team, who probably wouldn't have set that higher figure in the first place. That then gets passed down to the marketing team, who now need to do probably between 3 to 5 times what they were doing this year, without 3 to 5 times budget. So there's got to be a sort of a two-way conversation here, but you can't have that conversation unless you've got the metrics and the effectiveness and the processes in place that Nick's talking about, right? To be able to push back, you have to have the data. You have to be able to say, look, if you need this many leads, which will turn into this much business, then here's my ratios. For every dollar that I spend on marketing, I give you back $10 worth of pipeline. So therefore, the maths is pretty simple. If you want this, then we need this in budget. And then there's a negotiation to meet somewhere in the middle. But you have to have that two-way conversation, that oscillation, as Nick called it. I really like that term because it's essential, right?
Okay.
So,
Thank you, gents. We are rapidly coming towards the end of that 30 minutes. So to our listeners, thank you for your time. And I hope that has been insightful. Again, we just wanted to set the scene, touch on some of the pain points that we acknowledge and recognize are typically found in any marketing organization. But what are the solutions, right? So on the 25th of September, we will be hosting part 2 of our webinar series, where we'll start talking and looking specifically at the next steps from strategy to execution. We'll be talking about how you can streamline workflows, how you can create assets, approvals, connect planning, connect teams, start talking about the solutions and how we can help you collaborate and execute a lot of these strategies and eradicate a lot of the pain points. Something that I'm looking at on my screen right now, it says that starts at 6 p.m. I can't imagine that time is accurate. So we will no doubt make sure that everyone is aware of the full time that starts. We've got a few questions, so we will come back to you as a follow-up directly after this webinar with the answers to those questions, and we appreciate your time in posting those. But for now, thank you again so much for your time wherever you're watching us from, and we hope to see you again in a couple of weeks' time for part 2. Thank you to our panelists, thanks to Rich, and hopefully see you all again soon.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.